Okay, so the call of the bully. We are on chapter 5, A Second Chance. I had been escorted to a camp office on a lower level of Mr. Periwinkle's house. Now, as I waited for him, I watched the blackness outside slowly turn gray. Dawn couldn't be far off. I heard a slightly nervous cough, followed by Mr. Periwinkle's voice as he entered the room and sat down behind a big wooden desk. You'd think I'd be nervous, but there was nothing intimidating about Mr. Periwinkle. Besides, I expected to get kicked out, and that's exactly what I wanted. I'd had enough of this crazy Camp Wyoming and all the horrible people in it. The farther away from Todd Vanderdyck, the better. For the first time in my life, I was actually looking forward to receiving my punishment. Rodney, that was quite an evening you put us through, Mr. Periwinkle began. I didn't like the fireworks. There was a good bit of evidence in your trunk that says otherwise. Todd put it there, and he lit it. How else would he have known to look in that trunk? He claims to have seen it when you opened it to get your toothbrush, and we need to remember, Todd is a Vanderdyck, I'll say. His father is the pillar of the community, and young Todd has won the Camp Wyoming Leadership Award for the past 2 summers. Well, his plot to frame me did show outstanding initiative. It certainly did, he agreed. And then his face grew confused. Oh, now, I think we need to dismiss the conspiracy theories. What we need, listen, Mr. Periwinkle, I don't care. Kick me out of this asylum. He looked taken aback. He paused and stared down. His hands rested next to a paperweight and a mug full of pens and markers. It pains me, he continued, to hear a camper describe Camp Wyoming as an asylum. I think if you were to stay with us for the rest of the summer, Rodney, you would discover it a magical place. But, sadly, you have left me little choice. I'm going to have to call your parents to come get you. He reached for the phone. Percy! Mr. Periwinkle jumped, knocking over the mug of pens. Oh, dear, he stammered, looking up at the ceiling. Coming, sweetie. He took off through the office door. I heard him move through the house and up the stairs. I strained my ears to hear the conversation in the room above me. It was too muffled for me to make out the words, but I could tell that whoever had called Mr. Periwinkle was a woman with a sharp, bossy voice. After a minute, I heard Mr. Periwinkle retrace his path back to the office. He looked red and more flustered than usual. He sat back down and ran his hands over his face. He exhaled and said, Well, Rodney, it seems that Mrs. Periwinkle thinks you deserve a second chance. You've been forgiven. What? Why? I stammered. I don't really know. In over 30 years of marriage, she's never given me a second chance. So I'm not being punished? Oh, I didn't say that. No, she wants you punished severely, just not sent home. But I don't want to stay here. I want to speak to my parents. She said no phone calls. Something seemed fishy, but I didn't care. I had no intention of sticking around to discover what these people were up to. I'm calling home, I said, reaching over for the phone. I punched in my phone number. Oh, dear, Mr. Periwinkle whined, biting his nails. Oh, don't do that. You should hang up. He glanced nervously back at the ceiling. Hello? Came my dad's sleepy voice through the receiver. Dad! I yelled. Rodney? What is it? Why are you calling so early? Honey, Rodney's on the phone. I could hear my mom talking in the background. Dad, you've got to come up here and get me. Everyone here is mean. This kid framed me and said I set off some fireworks. Now the camp director says I'm going to be punished severely. What? My dad barked. I didn't pay all that money to send you off somewhere to be picked on and punished. I'll have you out there before dark. Is the camp director near? Yes, he's sitting right here. Mr. Periwinkle jumped back. Let me talk to him. I handed the phone over. Mr. Periwinkle held the receiver to his ear, reluctantly, as if it might bite him. I felt great. My dad was going to get me out of here. I watched and listened as Mr. Periwinkle cleared his throat and began stammering. Yes, well, we did find some in his trunk, and, well, we've decided to give him another chance. There needs to be some punishment. Oh, well, that's too bad. I'm sure he'd learn to love the place. What's that? No, there are no refunds. No, it's stated right in the contract. Yes, we have to be quite firm about the no refund policy. Mr. Periwinkle listened for a moment more. Okay, I'll give it to him. He handed me the phone. Rodney, my dad said, I've given it some thought, and I've decided I didn't raise you to be a quitter. Dad, you just said, Rodney, you're a Rathbone. Time to give it the old college try. But I'm just starting middle school. Well, that's beside the point. Anyway, you need to give that camp another shot. There are no two ways about it. I know you can handle everyone there. Look what you did this past year at school. If you don't like it in a couple weeks, call me again. But Dad, Rodney, I love you. Talk to you soon. I have to get ready for work. Have fun. Click. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. Mr. Periwinkle clapped his hands together. Well now, that's settled. Okay, we need to get ready for breakfast. A sharp tap at the partially open window interrupted his sentence. Todd's toothy grin appeared on the other side of the screen. I brought Rodney's things, he called into the room. I wanted to hurl the paperweight in his direction. Excellent, Todd, Mr. Periwinkle said. Todd gave me one of his evil smiles. Rodney, you're going to need to get your trunk latch fixed. Darn thing sprung open on me. I craned my neck and saw my belongings lying all over the grass. Mr. Periwinkle spoke up. Todd, it turns out that Rodney is going to remain with us for a while, so we'll need to get his stuff back to the cabin. Todd frowned. I think that's a bad idea. He paused, expecting Mr. Periwinkle to change his mind. When no reply came, he added, Well, he's not staying in my cabin. My parents always say that it's important for me to associate with the right sort. I don't think an arsonist is right sort material. I guess I could change its cabin. Put him in Loserville, Todd suggested. Its proper name is Cherokee, Mr. Periwinkle corrected him. Yeah, whatever. It would be a good way to start the healing process. Yes, so it would be. Wonderful idea. Mr. Periwinkle turned around to face me. Isn't Todd thoughtful? That wasn't exactly the word I had in mind. Todd was punching his fist into his palm and making faces at me behind Periwinkle's back. Now, why don't you gather your things? Suggested Mr. Periwinkle. The cabins are coming to line up for breakfast shortly. Todd shouted into the office. See you later, Mr. Periwinkle. I've got to go make my bed, wash my hands before breakfast, and see if any new kids need help finding their way around. I wanted to puke, but Periwinkle seemed to really believe him. Wonderful. Thank you, Todd. You know, Rodney, you could learn a thing or two from this one. You can see why I couldn't take your framing story seriously. I didn't answer. I may have been in a new location, but my life sure hadn't changed. I had a bully after me. No one believed what I had to say, and it looked like I might be stuck here for a long, long time. Chapter 6. Home, Strange Home. There were about a dozen cabins in the boys' area, but I had no problem spotting Loserville. Even if I had seen it during the night, you couldn't miss it by day. The cabin was sagging in the middle, but that was nothing compared to the weeds growing on the roof and the tattered canvas windows. The fact that some kid had scrawled the word Loserville across the front door also made it easy to spot. Either way, there was no mistaking it for the Algonquin cabin. Catching a ray or sliding away. I spun around. The Counselor Wu had walked up in back of me. He was holding a towel and probably heading back from the bathroom. What? I asked. He wore glasses with big black frames and had a black cap thing that looked like a flying saucer on his head. Later, I found out it was called a beret, and the little beard on his chin was called a goatee. Hand me that skin, Daddy-o, he said, sticking out his hand. I'm Wu, and I know what to do. Nice to meet you. I'm Rodney. His head started bopping back and forth as he said, Rodney swings from the tree, drink some tea, got to go pee. I wasn't sure if he was singing, rapping, or just having a fit. Play sax, Daddy-o? He asked. Excuse me? You on the stick? Huh? Saxophone, man. I need a tenor saxophone for my jazz ensemble. We play a lot of Miles Davis. I play the trumpet, the straw boss. Dig? I still wasn't following. No, I don't play the saxophone. His face fell, but then brightened as he asked, What about the bass guitar? Bum, 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 bum. He stood there looking down at me, making the bum, bum, bum noise and plucking an imaginary guitar in the air. No, I said, I don't play the guitar. Actually, the reason I'm here is I was just assigned to your cabin. A big grin spread across his face. Well, come feel the funk and grab a bunk. I found myself smiling too. For the first time since arriving at Camp Waimea, this Wu guy was crazy but nice. He reached down, picked up my trunk, and announced, Follow me, man, to Cherokee land. And follow him I did, though I couldn't help wondering how my new cabin mates would react to me. After all, in their eyes, I was the guy who had attacked them during the night. I doubted I'd be welcomed with open arms, especially since the smell of fireworks still hung in the air. Once inside the cabin, I noticed several kids huddled around and whispering. Others were staring off into space. Josh sat cross-legged on a top bunk, picking at his toenails. He gave me a nod. Yo, Rodney! Yo, I answered back. Still in shock but grateful that Josh was my new best buddy, I looked around, unsure of what to do. I figured I better claim a bunk. Sleeping bags lay on all except two of them. One of the available bunks was right below Josh, but as I approached, I saw that his mattress sagged all the way down in the middle. The idea of rusty old springs an inch from my face didn't exactly excite me. The other available bunk contained a nasty-looking gray pillow. I went to move it. Snap! The pillow almost bit my finger off. I jumped back and watched it rise on four legs and hiss at me. It was a raccoon. You don't want to wake up Harry, some kid said. Is he like a pet? I asked. No, he's far from tame. He just moved in here last summer and no one can get him out. Did you get your rabies shots? All at once, those straining rusty springs below Josh didn't seem so bad. I put my trunk next to the empty bottom mattress, sat down, and checked out my new surroundings. There was no denying that my cabin mates were a pretty motley-looking group. Several of them still wore the smoke stains and dirt of the night before, leading me to believe that hygiene wasn't a priority in this cabin. My feeling was reinforced when I noticed another boy with sweaty armpits that had soaked through his t-shirt. He was busy picking something out of his ear. The next kid was clean, but perhaps even more disturbing. He wore a sky blue dunce cap and matching cape. I guessed he was going for the wizard look. Now, I've always prided myself on not being judgmental, but I was beginning to wonder if I had more in common with the raccoon than the rest of this Loserville gang. Just then the door opened, and another boy stepped in. He was thin, with dark tanned skin and brown, almost black eyes. His black hair was combed neatly back, and what was even more shocking was that he was confident and cool. Maybe he had wandered in by accident, because he sure looked out of place. He must have been thinking the same about me. You look halfway normal, he announced, a relief. I'm Fernando. Who are you? Rodney. Sure, the terrorist trainee. We know all about you. Here we go, I started to think. Wu on the far side of the cabin, eyes closed, was tapping his foot and listening to his iPod. He wouldn't be any help. I stared back at the kid, ready for a fight, until I noticed he was grinning slightly. You know, Rodney, the 4th of July isn't until next week. Hey, I didn't light the firecrack, Fernando interrupted. Do you know that this bunch, he motioned around the cabin, has been whimpering for hours? Well, not that big fellow up there. He seemed to enjoy the whole show, but the explosions got stinky sweating, and that's not fun, I assure you. I assumed he was talking about the armpits kid. Listen, I said, holding up my hand. I didn't. You didn't do it, Fernando laughed. We know. I thought he was being sarcastic. I'm serious. I didn't. Fernando rubbed his temples. You're not one of those guys that needs everything repeated 5 times, are you? We know you didn't do it. You do? How? Because we know who did it. Thorin Oakenshield over here. He thumbed back at Wizard Boy. Saw Todd Vanderdyke last night. Thorin Oakensomething stepped forward. I saw him sneak into our cabin. I was ready to grab him, but he must have hit me with an immobilus spell because I couldn't move or speak. Yeah, that's called being too scared to move, Stinky joked. Scared? Thorin snapped. I happen to be the most important dwarf in Middle-earth. Last year you were Aslan, king of Narnia, which is ridiculous since Aslan's a lion. Ridiculous? Roar! He jumped across the cabin with his hands held out like cat claws. Stinky countered by ripping off his dingy sneaker and holding it in the air. Thorin gagged and fell away holding his nose. Not foot odor! It's my greatest weakness! The two of them broke into hee-hawing laughs. Do you see what I have to put up with? Fernando asked. Welcome to Loserville. He held out his hand. I shook it and knew right away that here was a kid I liked. And my name is Frank, Stinky added. Each kid in the cabin came up and said hello to me. Even if they were a bit odd, I could see that they were genuinely nice. I relaxed and yawned. I hadn't exactly had a good night's sleep. I closed my eyes for a minute, thinking about what Todd had done to me. I sure was glad to be away from him and the other Algonquin phonies. Maybe there were no flat-screen TVs or waterbeds, but hey, my new friends seemed great. And besides, we had something you'd never find in the Algonquin cabin. I smiled as Harry the raccoon waddled across the floor and disappeared below a bunk. And that is all we have time for today.